Hello, my name is Ashton Sanders from Team Drake, and I'll be doing a quick art asset walkthrough of our game that's based on Risk of Rain 2. So it's a third-person shooter, heavy emphasis on combat, and so I'm going to be walking through the different parts of our game and some of the different art assets that we would need. So this first screen here, this is our main menu. So this is what launches when you start the game. So you can start it, and it jumps into a tutorial. And in the tutorial, you can kind of see the player character. So right now we have our third-person default model with a different skin color that comes with the Unreal Engine system. And so one of the biggest and most important assets that we'll need is a player character. In the original Risk of Rain, or Risk of Rain 2 rather, the icon and the reference is a spaceman in a space suit. Something like that would be really cool, but the biggest thing is this thing on his back is actually a gun. So if you shoot, you can tell it's coming from the top where the gun is mounted on the player's back. So this is going to be the biggest thing that we need, because the player character is going to be in every single level and it's going to be visible in every single level, so this would be the main thing. After that, we have a couple of enemies. So enemies, we have 5 big enemy types, and one of them uses the same, actually 2 of them use the same skin and the same mesh that we have in place for the player character. Let me pull that up here. So this level here is so these are our enemy avatars. They have the purple skin color rather than the yellow that we have on the player character. But you can see they have the same mesh, they have the same design, and so some kind of enemy type would be really nice to have for these enemies, just because we want them to look different than the player character. We want to make it obvious that they're a different type of enemy. They shoot fireball attacks at the player, and so anything that can just shoot or fire something would be a good mesh for it. It doesn't have to necessarily be a humanoid type enemy. It's just an enemy type that has a ranged attack, but still follows the player on the ground. It doesn't float in the air. And the reason why I say it doesn't float in the air is we actually have an enemy type called a wisp, and the wisp enemy type does float in the air. So it also uses a fireball attack, but instead of following and chasing the player on foot, it floats toward them in air. So let me get these guys spawned in. I'm on the wrong side of the map. Spawned in here. There we go. So these are our wisps. You can't see them super well right now, so I'm going to show you a better version of them. But you can see they're surrounded by fire and they float towards the player, so they're just slowly moving towards the player, and then they fire off a fireball attack. So those are going to be another enemy type that exists in the game, and let me get a better image of it. Let's see. Here we go. Oh. There you go. You can kind of see they have yellow and then just 2 little dots for eyes. It's very difficult to see that during the gameplay. And the eyes follow the player, which is really cool. So it would be nice to have something like that on the wisp enemy, where they still have some kind of effect around them. They're still floating, they still have some kind of flame, but also have something central, whether it's an eyeball or some other feature that follows the player around, because we already have that kind of programmed into the enemy type, so it'd be really nice to have that continuity. This is what they look like. The other enemy type that looks similar to the player avatar, it's called the mountain enemy type. Where's the list? Alright, so the mountain enemy type, you can see it looks very similar to the ones we've already seen with a white skin. And these chase after the player and do melee damage. So you can see they have white, but it's the same model, it's the same mesh that we already have in place. And so they could be the same type of appearance. It can be the same type of asset that you'd use for the enemy avatar, the purple one, but we want to have some kind of differentiation between the enemy that shoots fireballs and the enemy that chases the player and does a melee attack. And so that distinction can come from their skin color, any kind of accent colors, just something to tell the player, okay, this enemy is going to be the fireball one, this enemy is going to be the melee attack one. Those are going to be our primary enemies in the maps and throughout the maps. And those skins, those meshes, are going to be the same across most of our enemy types, either the Wisp or the player character mesh. But we also have 2 boss enemy types in game. Let's see if I can just pull one in. There we go. So this big guy here, this is our biggest boss of the game. It's a platform worm, and so when it's in action, it starts simple and then it kind of builds on itself. So you hit the weak spot enough times, and then these platforms appear. So it'd be pretty cool to get some nice looking platforms. These aren't bad, but you can see that the texture on it is just kind of the checkerboard basic super grid texture. So it'd be nice to have a cleaner texture or something that we can put on the platforms. But the worm itself, right now we have a built up version using a lot of primitives. It'd be really nice if we could have a cool looking worm. And our whole vibe is going to be very spacey, very much just, colorful, bright, kind of alien, unique textures and unique appearance. And so anything that we could use it as a replacement for this big kind of stationary worm that we could have in the middle of this boss would be really cool to have. So these platforms and then the worm itself, if we could get either some upgraded textures for the platforms and uh, a better object or character for the worm with these weak spots that move up and up, that would be really nice to have since this is our biggest boss of the game. The other boss that we have is a jellyfish boss. This one is a little less important. It appears earlier in the game, and you can see right now it's just a big circle with some cones sticking out of it. And so essentially the jellyfish boss is going to be a pretty simple boss type. And as of right now, it only has 1 attack. And the biggest thing is when that attack is active, the tentacles change color. So it'd be cool if the jellyfish could, it's floating in air, it stays in air, it hovers, and the tentacles change color depending on the attack. So it'd be nice to have color changing tentacles or the ability to change color tentacles, but that's secondary to the platform worm. This is, like I said, it's going to be the lesser boss of the 2, so the focus would be on the platform worm, but still very bright, very vibrant, very colorful as an enemy. Those are going to be primary enemy types. Beyond enemies, we have a couple of environmental things that would be nice to have in the game. This level specifically uses this pile of rocks in order to get through the pile of rocks and then win the game. Let me show you. Where is my... So these rocks, they would be nice environmental assets to have. And then little things like this, little pickup items. So this is an explosive barrel. Would be really easy to just slap a texture on there and use that. So you just shoot it and it blows right up. Something like that. We also have teleporter shards, which right now have a pretty decent appearance. But for some of our levels, you have to collect a teleporter shard. And right now we just have a glowing triangle. So something along these lines, maybe a little more refined or a little clearer to the player. That would be nice to have as well, just because they are going to be primary objectives, both collecting the explosive barrel, collecting this teleporter shard. Those are going to be big focuses for some of our levels, so they'd be nice to clean up a little bit and have a little bit stronger as assets. Let's see, other environmental things. We have a couple of keys you can see down here right now. We have boxes for keys. We have this little tiny triangle, little silver triangle for keys. Just one key that we could change the color of. Could use that throughout a lot of different levels. So again, we just have a colorful square for some of our keys, and then a little triangle with a glowy effect on it. Any kind of key looking asset we could use across the board for all of those. Let's see. Beyond that, environmental things, so we have rocks. A teleporter is probably the most important environmental asset to include in the game, just because the teleporter is in every single level. You have to activate the teleporter to move on to the next level and eventually win the game. So teleporter is super important. A couple of reference images are up on our Trello cards, but this is going to be one of the highest priority items because it will be in every single level, regardless of the setup or the level progression. It's a very simple item. I think the biggest thing is having something that sets it apart from the rest of the level. So this design is pretty similar and comparable to the teleporter in Risk of Rain 2. But I think the color, the highlights, the flashing lights, that's what really draws attention to it. So a shiny material or anything that's kind of bright and vibrant would be really beneficial for the teleporter because we really need to draw player attention to it. Let's see, beyond that we need rock assets, like a ton of rock assets. So we have a mountain level that has this little village here. We also have a different mountain level that has these big mountains in the background, kind of progression through a few rooms. So it'd be nice to have some rocks, rock textures, rock meshes that we can just plop in the level just to add to the level design. Any kind of rock, ideally something that can scale up at a pretty decent size. Like in the last level, there were big giant boulders blocking the way. Something that can comfortably scale up to that size would be very useful. Again, these nice big chunky rocks, something like that, we could use them pretty much across every level. I mean, we have most of our levels are either going to be in the mountains. We have a cavern level, which had the wisp enemies in here, so we can put the rocks in here. And then we also have a sky island, and then a wave. It's a ruined mountain area, so rocks are good. Grass would be a pretty decent texture or model to have if possible. You can see we would have patches of grass here, 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 just to add a little flavor to the level and level design. Yeah, you can kind of see where grass would go in this one. Trees, probably not overly relevant. We don't have a lot of outdoor nature levels. The ones that we do have are going to be mountainy or cavernous. So grass is good, rocks are good, but beyond that, it's not going to be a huge focus for most of our levels. Let's see, what else we got? Other objects, we have little buttons that you can press. in this level somewhere. Looks like this in game. It's just a button. Be pretty easy to change that into a different texture, so I wouldn't prioritize making a button over here the teleporter shard, picking up something like this, making that a little cleaner. We also have storage capsules. Right now they're kind of the default storage capsules. So something that we could put items into, like a bucket, or not a bucket, like a treasure chest of some kind of object that the player can open. Right now we have a chest version here, we have this kind of chest, we have all kinds of storage objects. But really, if we just had one asset that we could use to store items and put items into, so that way the player can open it across the board, that should cover all our bases for the most part. You can see all of the different versions that are essentially treasure chests or something that we can open. We also have force fields in some of the areas, some of the levels. This is not a bad asset that we already have, this kind of purpley color, so not a high priority item, but definitely something where if we could upgrade it or make it look a little cooler or give it a different effect that would draw a little bit more attention to it, that'd be pretty sweet. On that, I know we kind of talked about the platforms, but let me go ahead and pull that level up just to kind of highlight some of the areas. So this platform level, it's big, it's got a lot of different areas, different movement, but the platforms are pretty repetitive. So we have one that disappears if you stand on it too long. So I think we have two that do that, but they have different times. So we have red that disappears very quickly, and you can see right now we just have red platform. And then yellow, we have a moving platform, so it goes back and forth. And then blue both moves and disappears if you stand on it too long. So those are the three big colors for the platform. We have this yellow one that's just a moving platform, red that's stationary but disappears if you stand on it too long, and blue that moves and disappears if you stand on it too long. And it would be cool to get some kind of model that we can use instead of these kind of base primitives and really make it something that we can accent with a special color or do something special to, so that way you know the difference between the platforms, but they just look a little nicer. They look like they belong in the level a little more rather than just kind of floating in midair. Let's see. There's the teleporter again. We do have a couple of different types of teleporters. You go into a level design blueprints, you can see we have teleporter, teleporter broken, teleporter that summons the jellyfish boss, teleporter for this level, this level, this level. The reason for that is the teleporter has to send the player to the next level, and sometimes the player has to do different things to the teleporter. Like in this level, the player has to collect 4 teleporter shards. So again, that's these little diamond guys here. So the player has to collect all 4 of these in order to activate the teleporter. Otherwise, it's just it looks broken. You can see that it's not as clean as the other assets, and then, or the other versions of the teleporter rather. The cavern level, you can see this teleporter, it's missing one of its arms. The teleporter is missing a piece, and the missing piece is actually up on this platform here. And so you can collect the teleporter piece and then run all the way to the teleporter and attach it, and now the teleporter is a lot brighter and it glows, and it adds to the level overall. So the teleporter having one base asset is really nice, but it'd be really cool if we could have like 2 parts to the teleporter, so we could modify the appearance of the teleporter. So one that's missing an arm or one that looks decrepit, something that we can change on our end so it doesn't have to be redesigned every time. And it may be super easy to make 3 or 4 different versions of a teleporter. I don't know for sure, but I imagine it would be easier to make 2 teleporter parts or 3 teleporter parts, and then we construct them in our levels based on, you know, what we need or what the level needs. Beyond that, a couple of UI elements. I'm actually going to go into the build to show these off. So this is our most recent build. And I know I talked about the main menu. You can pick a level and go into a level. We'll just jump into the tutorial. Every single level is going to have this HUD, and most of them have some kind of objective list that will kind of walk the player through where to go and what order to do things. And we always have the primary attacks, secondary attack, and third attack, special attack R. That is actually a grenade, so grenade would also be nice to have, but we have a passable grenade right now, and it kind of matches our style, so it doesn't stand out as much. But this secondary attack, I don't know how well you can see it. It's just a ball that goes out. It's a blue ball that explodes on impact, so maybe something special there to clean it up. This grenade, right now it's just a green oval with a little brown part on top. A more realistic looking grenade would be cool. But it's interesting that the crosshair changes. But once you're in a level, you can pause it. So this is the pause menu, and you can continue playing. It takes you right back in. You can quit and either exit the game or go into the main menu. We may make changes to the pause menu because we're thinking about potentially putting a save button or a save option into the game if it's possible within the time frame that we have available. But UIs are pretty passable. They're pretty decent UIs. They look pretty clean. So the assets within the game is definitely going to be the focus. But these are, I mean, the levels in action. You can see it's meant to be kind of shiny, very bright, using a lot of color palette decisions or options that make it really appealing, really vibrant. It's not supposed to be very dull or muted. It's not a horror game. It's supposed to be a fun, action-packed game in space where you're fighting all these enemies and enemy types. So the goal is to make every level bright, make all of the assets look unique. We're really going for more of like an alien type species, an alien planetary exploration with these levels. And so anything that's fun, anything that's colorful, anything that's unique in appearance, you know, some of the basics we want to have in place, like we want to have a teleporter that works. We want to have these shards that look like shards from a teleporter. We don't want them to look drastically different than what we were envisioning here in the game, but any kind of cleanup, any kind of changes to textures, environments that make it look more like a space kind of location and more playful and more fun, that would really benefit our game at this point. So if you have any questions, obviously feel free to message any of us in Discord, and we're happy to provide reference images, additional ideas. But hopefully this video kind of captures what we're going for artistically and the style of the game. It showcased the levels that we have in place right now, and how they're set up. So hopefully this was a good introduction into our Risk of Rain fan boot, and we look forward to seeing what you produce.